good?
Yep.
We're good to go? Okay.
Rolling.
Thanks so much for coming, everybody. I want to introduce you to Ableton Push, our new instrument. Sort of the idea with Ableton Push was when you're starting a new piece of music, the most interesting thing to do is to play. And in the past, making electronic music especially, you spend a lot of time sort of mousing around in a computer. And we really wanted to make an instrument that would let you play to create new musical ideas without having to think about the computer at all. We thought from the very beginning, what are the sorts of things that you need to do to make music in the world today? You want to be able to play and program beats. You want to be able to play melodies and harmonies. You want to be able to tweak the sounds that you're working on. And then you want to be able to capture all that stuff as ideas, phrases of music that you can then combine and move around and create a song structure out of. So with that in mind, we built this to do exactly those things. And one of the really interesting things is that in our notes mode, where the pads are representing individual notes, the grid updates dynamically depending on what kind of instrument you're playing, just by selecting the track. So when you're playing drums, the pad is set up for a very special kind of drum grid. When you switch to a track that's playing a pitched instrument, then the grid completely realigns itself and allows you to play pitched information. And you don't have to push buttons to get that to happen, you just have to select the track. So when we have drums selected, the bottom left 16 pads are a kind of real-time playing grid, like every 16-pad drum machine that you know. They feel great, they're velocity sensitive, they're somewhere between the size of the sort of last generation of grid controllers and the sort of classic MPDs or MPCs that you know. So the pads are a bit smaller than those, but they're raised up and they feel pretty good. So that's these 16 pads. The 16 pads to the right of that allow you to set the length of the loop that you're currently working on. So each of these pads corresponds to 1 bar. And if you want to create a 4-bar loop, you can press bar 1, and then while you're holding it, press bar 4, and now you're sequencing a 4-bar loop, or 1 bar, or 2 bars. And you notice when I did that, this green moving playhead starts happening. That's because the top 4 rows are a step sequencer. And the way this works is that the last pad that you play in the 16-pad real-time grid is selected for step sequencing. This column of buttons here is the resolution of the step sequencer grid, anywhere from quarter notes up to 32nd note triplets. I usually leave it at 16ths for the kind of music that I'm doing. So once that's enabled, I can just plug in some 8th notes by doing every other 16th note, and then the playhead starts moving to show me where I am in the pattern. And then if I want to do real-time playing on top of that, I just punch in and then play. And then punch out when I'm done. If I want to quantize that, I can hold down this quantize button to get a whole bunch of quantization options. Let's say I want to quantize to 70-something%. So it's still a little bit human. Then when I press the quantize button, it snaps everything part way to the grid, but not all the way. So step sequencing and real-time playing at the same time on the same set of pads. There's also a real-time repeat mode. So I enable repeat, and then again, this column of buttons here sets the resolution for the repeated notes for any pad that I hold down. And now you can see that these are both velocity and pressure sensitive. So as I lean in, the velocity goes up for the pad that I'm leaning in on. We also do real-time swing. We have a dedicated encoder for swing. So you'll notice these are touch-sensitive encoders. So as I touch the top of the encoder, the display changes to show the swing amount. When I let go, it zooms out to show additional parameters. Let me dial in some swing. That's way too much, so I'll bring it back down to something more musical. And then when I'm ready, I can just punch that in. Then turn off repeat mode. Maybe plug in a couple more notes in real time and quantize those. So it's this really fast workflow for beat making, because if you know where you want things in the grid, you put them in via step sequencing. If you want to play, you do it in real time, but you don't have to switch around to like different modes to do that. Because we have so many pads, we can do all of it at the same time. Good, so that's the beat stuff. Now, when I move over to another track that has a pitched instrument on it, like I said before, the pad grid updates to deal with pitches. And there's 2 ways we represent pitches on the pad grid. One is the mode that we're in by default, which is this fully diatonic way of playing. So every note is in the key that's currently selected. And you change keys with this set of 12 green buttons up here, and then switch scale types using these 2 yellow buttons to the right. There's 29 scales built in, major, minor, all of the other diatonic modes, and then a whole bunch of non-Western modes, various Asian and Arabic scales, and then also things like pentatonics and minor blues, super Locrian, scales that are common to jazz players, for example. So that's the in-key mode. In the chromatic mode, you basically have all of the chromatic possibilities of the piano, but sort of dropped into a new arrangement on the pad grid. So here, the pad lighting gives you some clues as to what's going on. The blue pads are the tonic, or the key center that we're in. The white pads are the other notes in the scale, and then the unlit pads are the notes that aren't in the scale. In this case, we're in C major, so the unlit pads are the black keys on a piano. And what's cool about this is that you can play a fully chromatic melody. So if I play the Head to Giant Steps, for example, so I had to learn that because I have all these notes available. It's not necessarily any easier to learn this on this instrument than it would be on a piano, but I can transpose it really easily. And that's where things start to get very fun in the chromatic mode. If I want to play that a whole step higher on a piano, I need to learn an entirely new set of fingerings because now the black keys are sticking out in an entirely different way. To do that on push, because of this isomorphic pitch layout, I just need to move my hand over to a new position, sort of like shifting positions on a guitar, right? So to play a whole step higher, or cello, I can shift over now to a whole step higher by moving over 2 pads and then play the same pattern that I played before, and I end up with the same result in a new key. So transposition is now like kind of a non-issue in the chromatic mode. And in diatonic mode, some things become even easier because now there are no wrong notes at all. So to play a scale now, I can move to the right. In both modes, we're moving stepwise to the right and up in fourths. So in the in-key mode, they're diatonic fourths, and in the chromatic mode, they're perfect fourths. A faster way, though, in in-key mode to play a scale is 3 pads to the right and then up to the next row. If I want to change to a different scale, for example, to play in B Lydian, I push B to choose the new key center, switch using these scale type degrees, or scale type buttons to Lydian, and then play exactly the same fingering again. It's kind of like having a magic capo if you're a guitar player. So once you start finding patterns, again, everything now is position-based rather than thinking about sort of finding voicings in new keys. Everything is based on the shape of your hand, and that shape is movable around. So if I play a triad, for example, now I have all the diatonic triads in this in-key mode just by moving around to different places on the pad grid, which is great for playing sort of boring things like triads, but is really cool when you start getting into kind of weird harmonies because all this stuff is movable now. And if you want to play jazz, because we build up in the columns in fourths, it's suddenly really easy to play this kind of fourth-based harmony. If you're not a pianist, this is an entirely new way of kind of approaching playing pitches that isn't really possible without a bunch of training. If you are a pianist or you play another instrument you can get around with facility, this is another entirely new way of doing that stuff. And I found that as I play this thing for more and more time, I'm getting better at it. And it's been a long time since I've learned a new instrument, so it's been really cool and really fun for me to watch myself sort of become proficient on a new instrument again. Good, so that's playing melodies and harmonies. We've seen the drum stuff. So now let's get a new sound. If I push our browse button, the entire encoder and display section now turns into kind of a mini browser where I can maneuver around between a bunch of different types of sounds. So I'm selecting the category here, synth keys, and then I have a whole bunch of different presets that are available, which I can load with that green button. And now all the pitch stuff is still the same, it's just playing a different sound. And I go back out of browse mode into device mode, and now all of these encoders are mapped to do interesting things to that sound. And so maybe I want to record a pattern now. Well, I know that my drum loop from before was 2 bars, so I'm going to enter our fixed length recording mode, set that to 2 bars, and now as soon as I press record again, I'm automatically going to create a 2-bar loop. So I press play to start the playback of the pattern I had before, and I can just punch in pressing the record button and play anytime. And that's just going to loop. And now if I want to capture some parameter automation on top of that, I just leave it running and tweak the knobs. Quantize that, punch out. I'll move over to another track now where I already had preloaded a bass sound and record that. And I could capture parameter automation for this sound too, again in the same clip. And I can duplicate this set of patterns that I'm working on, delete all the loops individually, delete individual notes. That's all fine. So I've got some material here that I kind of like. So now I'm going to move out of our note mode and into session mode. And in this mode, you can think of sort of zooming out on the whole device. Now the pads are no longer representing individual notes, but the whole loop itself that I'd worked on before. So now I can start and stop a clip just by pressing the button that corresponds to that clip, or a whole row of clips, all the ideas at the same time, by launching the scene. So these become scene launch buttons now in session mode. And I can switch now from our device control to, say, volume control, where I can mix, turn stuff down, turn stuff up, and really get in and adjust the parameters for those clips that I was working on. Stop clips by launching a scene that has nothing in it. Maybe fire some different clips, some stuff that I recorded before. So what I've been doing this whole time is not using my computer, which is really fun. I've been playing an instrument and tweaking knobs and pressing buttons, but what I've really been doing in the background is capturing all of that stuff into live session view. So what's actually happening in the background, the kind of under the hood heavy lifting, is being done in live. And what's amazing about that is, instead of having to develop a new piece of software to kind of handle the stuff that we're doing over here, we just made live work well with this and built a new workflow that takes advantage of things that were available in live anyway. But what you have now is a partially finished song ready to be mixed and edited in live session view and then moved over to live's arrangement view to do the finalization stuff. So our workflow that we imagine for this is that you start with nothing with Push, make beats and patterns, and then once you've got a bunch of material put together, then you turn to live and it's already there. So the stuff that you would have had to do before with boring MIDI controllers and a mouse, you can now do from this really fun instrument, and then come over here and do the mixing and editing stuff that live is really good at too. So that's kind of it. That's Ableton Push in a nutshell.